Hey y'all, I'm Hope. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my interview wrap-up. Jacob is here. He's behind the camera.
Hello.
He's joining me again this year to talk about some of our stats, our least favorite books, some honorable mentions, and then our top 5 of the year. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun filming this last year. I think last year we did the thing with the shark plushie in the video. We're not doing that this year because that's a pain in the ass to set up, but like... Mostly because the shark did not want to stay standing up.
No,
it wanted to fall over.
You're saying we're kind of just going, through this as we can. So
yeah, we're literally doing this while we're waiting for a pie to bake. We did not leave it unattended. There's somebody watching the pie, but we put a pie in the oven, and so we're doing this in the little bit of time that we have while that's baking. So yeah, I think we're just gonna dive in. I think we're gonna start with stats and then move from least positive to most positive feelings.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so for stats, I read 73 total books this year. That was, of course, it's like way zoomed out, 16,803 pages read and 210.75 hours of books read, and my average rating for the year was 3.99 stars.
And for me, I read 62 books this year for a total of 13,759 pages read, and my average rating for the year was a 3.9.
Oh, we were really close on that.
Yeah.
You had the slightly lower rating, but I think you read a lot more like 2 and 3 stars, I think, than I did.
I also didn't rate a bunch of stuff I read.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So with that in mind, do we want to go ahead and move on to our least favorite book of the year?
We may as well. I had a hard time picking mine, so... Oh, you had a very clear one.
Yes.
I had 2 that I didn't like, but I ultimately went with, for my least favorite book of the year, was From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. It was a tie between that initially and The Island of Dr. Moreau, which was interesting because it was like a classic and paranormal romance. But I ultimately decided to go with From Blood and Ash because the issues that I had with The Island of Dr. Moreau are more a product of that book's time. It was some of the issues with like racism that the book has. That was why I didn't enjoy it. Whereas From Blood and Ash, I feel like, is just poorly written. It's really badly paced and badly plotted, and the characters kind of don't make a whole lot of sense. And also they all have stupid names. So, and I've gone on and read more of the books, and I like the later books better, but I think From Blood and Ash is, of the like modern books that I have read, the worst one I read this year.
Okay. My worst of the year was Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. Look, I know that Rupi Kaur has been through a lot in her life. She's been through a lot of trials and tribulations. But I listened to the audiobook of this. I see that it is published while I was still in high school. And suddenly, why all of these things that she is saying make sense to me and seem very familiar to me made a lot of sense, because I think this book made the rounds quite a bit in high school for me. Because a lot of this is, it reads like Instagram captions. I really hate to put it that bluntly, because I do feel like that is somewhat being dismissive, but that is the only way I can compare it to, is just some of what she puts down in this is just extremely corny. It's very eye-roll worthy to me. I have no doubt that it's coming from a genuine place, but it just did not land with me in any way, shape, or form. And I was really glad at the end that I was listening to it at 2 times speed, because if I wasn't, I probably would have DNF'd it. So
that's fair.
It was not enjoyable in any way, shape, or form. I found it corny. I found it annoying in a lot of respects. And I have to agree with one of the main criticisms of it, and that it just reads like Instagram captions. It's Insta poetry. At least that's how I see it. But again, no disrespect to Ms. Kaur. She's obviously puts a lot of emotion into this, and I have no doubt that what she puts in there was genuine. It just did not land with me in any form. So that was my least favorite of the year.
That's fair. I should have been able to guess that one, because that was recent.
It was the only book this year I rated 1 star. So
I really should have been able to guess that, because I remember you talking about it like just recently, and yet for some reason that one slipped my mind. I think I forgot that you had read it.
I only listened to it about a month ago, so it's also probably a bit of recency bias.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sticking in there. But yeah, that's, it is what it is.
Yeah. The good news is now that we have the negativity out of the way, we get to move on to the stuff that we actually liked.
Yeah, we get to
and that's a lot more fun to talk about. So I think we're going to start with honorable mentions, things that we really enjoyed that just didn't make it into our top 5 for the year. And I feel like this is where it's going to be really clear that we have very different reading tastes.
Yes.
Because I read like tons of sci-fi, fantasy, and mystery, and you read kind of...
I read a lot of different stuff.
You do. You have very broad tastes.
Yes.
But you definitely read a lot more like contemporary or literary fiction than I do.
Yeah, I do read a lot more lit fic than you do, which I think will show up in my top 5 list at the very least.
Yeah, I think this is like the bit of the video that's going to make it really clear that we have very different reading tastes.
So if you want to go ahead and start with your honorable mentions.
Okay, let me pop over to my list because I've immediately forgotten them, because of course I have.
Cool.
Okay, so my first honorable mention is one that I don't own physically. I have it as an ebook, which was Into the Riverlands, which is one that I read recently as well, by Nevo. This is the 3rd book in the Singing Hills Cycle series, which is a series of almost said short stories. That's not correct. A series of novellas that are all about like storytelling and collecting histories. And I just love these books. I love the main character of Chi and their bird companion, Almost Brilliant. They're just both really great characters, and I love the way that these books kind of tackle the ideas around storytelling and who gets to tell stories, what histories get saved, which ones kind of get ignored, or like the reasons that histories get saved. I just think it's a really interesting exploration of storytelling like as a medium, and I really enjoyed these. So I've liked every installment in the series, but yeah. Do you want to go ahead and do an honorable mention? We'll just alternate.
Yeah, we'll do that, and I'm going to read the full title. This one, my first honorable mention is Ice Pick Surgeon: Murder, Fraud, Sabotage, Piracy, and Other Dastardly Deeds Perpetuated in the Name of Science by Sam Kean. Pretty cut and dry point to this book. It's a nonfiction book that's just different stories about various wrongdoings done, and with the idea of scientific advancement. And it talks from everything about lying about results that you're getting, lurking in labs, to things as large scale as the Tuskegee experiments involving syphilis that were, look it up if you don't know about it. It's an insane story. But it's a really good nonfiction book. It's probably my favorite one of the year. Well, actually, that's not true. Spoiler for my top 5. But it's a really fun listen if you're interested in stuff like that. I can't recommend it enough. It just didn't quite make the cut for my top 5.
It's fair. Conveniently, we had a copy.
Yeah.
I do need to read this soon.
You will like it. You will like it.
Yeah, I think I will, because I love history of medicine and history of science kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I can't get that quite back on the shelf. Okay, you stay there with the glass turtle. That's fine. Can you hand me that book?
Yes. There you go.
So my next honorable mention, if I don't drop it on the floor first, was Strange Practice. Oh good, the fireworks have begun for New Year's Eve.
Yeah, we're filming this on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, it's New Year's Eve, and I didn't think about the fact that there would be fireworks tonight. So just apologies for the fireworks in the background.
It's okay, I thought it was a gun.
Yeah, no. Our neighborhood likes fireworks at holidays. Anyway, this was Strange Practice by Vivian Shaw, which is an urban fantasy story set in London, and it follows... what is her name? Why is that escaping me? Greta Helsing. Why is that escaping me? Anyway, it follows Greta Helsing, who's a doctor for monsters and the undead in London, and she gets involved in solving a murder mystery so that she can prevent more of her patients dying after somebody that, not that she knows, but one of her patients knows, turns up like gravely injured, so she gets involved in trying to solve this mystery. I liked this because it has lots of like really great found family elements, and it's a really interesting blend of like cozy and spooky. But again, it just like didn't quite make the cut for my top 5 because I had some really great books that I read this year, but this was definitely up there in terms of like my ratings. I think I gave it 5 stars too.
Okay, my next honorable mention is In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. Incredibly, this is another nonfiction story where Machado tells her story about being in an abusive same-sex relationship. It is and she mixes it in with these ideas of living in the dream house with this individual, and the idea of romance, sex, things like that, but also shows quite a bit toward her feelings of being in this relationship, especially as it spirals out of control. And she does it in a very poetic manner. It's a very unique way to tackle the subject matter that is, especially with one so dark, quite frankly. This is a very bleak book. I would definitely not recommend it unless you understand what you're getting into with the subject matter and understand that, you know, what it's going to talk about once it gets into it, because in the middle and tail end of the book, it does get very, very bleak. But it is a phenomenal job, phenomenal book. Like I said, if you are comfortable with getting into the topic, I can't recommend it enough. I also want to specifically recommend the audiobook for it, because it is narrated by Machado, and she does a impeccable job. She does a fantastic job. But yeah.
Cool. Another nonfiction I haven't read. This is where that difference between our reading taste is really starting to show up. Okay, give me that one.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. More fireworks.
This makes for a helpful blooper section at the end of the video.
It sure is. My next honorable mention, I'm so distracted by the fireworks, I'm forgetting what I'm talking about.
Okay.
My next honorable mention, or rather my last one, is The Appeal by Janice Hallett. I think this is the only one on my list that isn't sci-fi, fantasy, or horror, but this one is a mystery that's really interesting because it's told entirely through emails amongst the different members of a theater group, and it's a mystery that unfolds around a young girl who's been diagnosed with I think cancer. I can't remember which variety of cancer, but she's like gravely ill, and this movement in this theater group kind of springs up around her, and then a series of events unravels that we're seeing through kind of reading between the lines in these emails, and I think there's a really interesting format. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to the author's next book, because she has another one coming out in the US next month, so very cool.
All right. And my final honorable mention is Uzumaki by Junji Ito. Oh, you did on that one. Okay.
Yeah, because you gifted that one to me.
That's right.
Oh, it's in the other room.
Oh, well.
I'll put a picture here.
Uzumaki, easily. I was introduced to the world of Junji Ito earlier this year. I read a lot of his stories. Uzumaki was easily my favorite. It's a really harrowing, disturbing story where Junji Ito, at least in my opinion, his body horror and illustrations were at the top of their game, at least in terms of what I've read. The only other book of his that I read this year that I think came close in terms of visuals was Romina. It's a shame the story in that one sucked. So, but Uzumaki, I highly recommend reading the entire collection. They do make a special edition where it's the entire series of chapters in one bound book.
I think that's the most common one here in the US.
Yeah, in the US I feel like that's definitely it, but I'll highly recommend it. It is fantastic. And like I said, easily one of my favorite manga of the year, although not my absolute favorite. But that ends my honorable mentions, and I'm ready to talk favorites.
Right, we've now reached the top 5. So this is the exciting bit, because then we get to talk about the stuff we really liked. And that's always more fun than anything else.
Yes.
So yeah, if you can hand me that top book off that stack, I'm just going to go in that order because they're stacked that way, it's easy.
Yeah. Now I do want to say, Hope's going in random order. I did rank mine, although I'm not going to put too much.
Yeah, so mine is just in random order, and yours is going to be in reverse order.
From 5 to 1.
Yeah, okay.
Although I'm not going to draw too much attention to that, but that is something if you want to keep in mind, you can.
But my first favorite book of the year, and actually the first book that I read this year, was Marvelous Light by Freya Marske, which is a fantasy romance set in Edwardian London following Robin and Edwin. Robin is just like a normal dude, and Edwin is a magician. And Robin accidentally becomes the liaison for the human world to the magic world, and Edwin is his counterpart. But in getting involved in the magic world, he also gets cursed, and so he has to work together with Edwin to try and break that curse. And I absolutely love this book. I think it's fantastic. I think the writing is beautiful. I think that the relationship between Robin and Edwin and the way that it develops across the story is really believable, and it's also like really heartwarming and charming. And there's a lot of like really intense emotional moments in here. And I just really liked everything about this book. And there's a sequel out now that I need to read because I'm really excited for that too. But this was basically one of the best books I read this year, and also the first thing I read this year. So I started out the year really on a high note. But yeah, cannot more highly recommend this if you like fantasy romance at all.
So, my first favorite book of the year is going on the theme of romance. Is This Is How You Lose a Time War by Amal El-Moutar and Max Gladstone. I really hope I said that correctly.
I think you did.
This is also, I would say, is more like a sci-fi romance in a way, with the big claim to this book being just how lyrical and poetic the writing is, and it lives up to expectations. This is probably the most beautiful and outright best writing I read all year. The story, it's a relatively short story, very simple. It is a kind of sapphic Romeo and Juliet retelling in a way, but placed in this science fiction story to where you have the two characters who are just named Red and Blue, who are fighting for their each individual's civilization in the future, trying to win this war of time travel against the other. And the characters start writing letters to each other, as they are big agents in their individual factions, and they start writing letters to each other first as a way to taunt the other, and then it slowly builds into something a lot more personal and eventually romantic. Again, the writing in this is phenomenal. It is a very easy read. I will say that that it can get a bit too lyrical for its own good, at least in my opinion at this time, which is probably why it ranks at the bottom of my top 5. Mm-hmm. But it is just that good to where it still crosses the mark. I would highly recommend it. It is a very fun read. Although, like I said, do be prepared if not all of what they're saying really kind of absorbs at first go. All right.
Well, to go off of your points about really good writing,
there you go.
My next favorite was A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. And this one I wouldn't call lyrical, but like the way that she describes things is just really innovative and interesting. And there is so much meaning packed into everything that she puts on the page. There's not anything there that isn't going to be important. And so I think that that's really interesting, just kind of the way that meaning is packed in. But this is the second book in a duology. It's the Teixcalon duology. First book is a memory called Empire. I think of the two, this is my favorite, although I really love both of them, and they're both like all-time favorite books for me. But this one's really interesting because it takes the world set up in a memory called Empire. And that book follows Mahit, who becomes ambassador from her LaSalle mining station where she lives to the Teixcalon Empire, and gets involved in a murder mystery trying to figure out what happened to her predecessor. This book takes kind of the ending of that book, which is very intense, and it takes that and expands it into a much larger world, because in the first book you only have Mahit's perspective, and here you have several POV characters, and you start to see like a much broader perspective on the world, and you see for every situation like multiple perspectives on that situation and the different ways that different people understand what's happening. And so I thought that was really interesting. This one kind of following from the events of the first book, so I can't say too much without spoiling that one. But this one is following kind of a first contact story that's also dealing with the fallout of the events of the end of the first book. But genuinely, this is one of my favorite sci-fi books ever. This series is definitely my favorite sci-fi series, and I'm really looking forward to reading more from Arkady Martine because, again, her writing is just really fantastic.
All right, next up on my list is Song of Solomon by the late, great Toni Morrison. Going in back to a theme of really, really good writing. This is my first Toni Morrison book, and man, I understand the hype now. It is another beautifully written book that is extremely large in scale. But the basis of this book is a coming-of-age story for one man named Milkman Dead, who is a black man, who is a black child who grows up to be a young man living in the Rust Belt of the United States. And it is the amount of themes that Morrison tackles in this is incredible, especially for a book of its length, because if I'm not mistaken, this is not a terribly long book. But it is a really well written, the abuse, like I said, I hate to sound like a broken record, but how Morrison writes everything to be as detailed and as sprawling as it is, and it captured my attention like very few books has, not just this year, but in general. It was and I will say that the book is weird. the allegories and the visuals depicted can be a little bit, off the wall in a few different ways. But to me, it was one of several books I read this year that once I started listening to it, because again, I listened to this on audiobook, I couldn't stop. I could not listen to anything else. So, but it's another very literary, very well written book. But it's probably one of the best coming of age stories I have seen in any media in quite a while. At least at the very least, it is the one that's held my attention the best.
Fair. That's one I need to get to, because I haven't read that one, but I've read another Toni Morrison that was really good. Because I read the Bluest Eye for a class one time.
Yeah.
And I think you'd like that one as well.
Yeah, and the one thing I do also want to add is it is, another way it's similar to kind of This Is How You Lose a Tom War, and that I do feel like that is, with how dense it is at times, that's another book that is going to be kind of difficult to pull everything away. It's actually, I rated this originally after I first read it as 4 stars, although I will probably call it a 5-star now. Just because at that first go, right after I finished listening to it, I didn't feel like I pulled everything away from it. It is just that packed, especially at the end. The end goes in a lot of different twists and turns in a lot of ways that you wouldn't expect. And so it took a while for it to really, hit its full potential in me. But it's after I sat and thought about it and let it sink in a little bit. That's when I really started appreciating it. So
cool. So my next favorite book of the year, I think it just occurred to me, what order these are in? Chronological. It's just because I pulled them off. I put them in the order that I had read them.
Yeah, it works.
Anyway, I've just put 2 and 2 together, what order I put these in. Anyway, my next favorite book I read this year was Sorrowland by River Solomon. Future hope here. I realized in the editing process that my description of this book was really rambling and kind of nonsensical, so I wanted to give it a second shot here. But this next book was Sorrowland by River Solomon, which I absolutely loved for the writing. I think the writing is beautiful. I think it's got some really fantastic characters. This book follows Vern, who's a young woman who escapes from a cult and gives birth to 2 children out in the woods and begins to raise her children there. And as the years go by, her body begins to undergo some strange changes, leading her to kind of go on this journey to both improve the life of her children, but also to kind of figure out what's going on with her body and why things are changing and what's happening. So that's kind of where it starts, and I don't want to say too much more because this book goes a lot of different places, and I kind of went into it blind. I knew that it was about Vern, and there was a cult involved, but that's all I really knew. And I feel like my reading experience was really good because of that, because it really let me just kind of be along for the ride. I just love this book, though, because, again, the writing is great, the characters are fantastic. I also think there's a really sweet kind of found family element in here, where Vern kind of gets a support network that she didn't expect to have, and I think that that's really well done. And I also just love Vern as a protagonist and the ways that she makes decisions and the things that she does. I think she's just such an interesting character. But yeah, I love this book, and I was not happy with the way I described it before. So anyway, here's hopefully a slightly more concise and clear description of why I love this book.
All right.
I know I have hiccups.
My next book is the complete opposite of what we've talked about so far, which is Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. And this is a book that I had been putting off reading for quite a while. Because Anthony Bourdain very much is a hero of mine. A personal thing about me is I love to cook. I'm very interested in cooking. And Anthony is very much a reason why that is. And unfortunately, a few years ago, he has since passed away by his own hands. And since then, I've really struggled to bring myself to read the book, especially considering I wanted to listen to this on audiobook. And he narrates it. It's narrated by him, because this was written within like 2005 or something like that. But I finally pulled the trigger on it, and I'm really glad I did, because this was something that, I mean, the basis of the book by itself is him telling stories of coming up in the restaurant world, from starting as just a dishwasher in this little, I think, Cajun or seafood place, to owning his own restaurants that are, Michelin star level, and him being very well renowned to eventually getting his own TV show, No Reservations. Which if anyone watching this has not watched that, I would highly recommend it. It is one of the best shows of its kind, in my opinion, that's ever been released. So it's very basic in what it is, but if you're familiar with Anthony Bourdain, everything there is just very much him. It's a very witty book. It's funny. It does not hide any of the gory details of a lot of things that are not very good about the restaurant world, like the poor wages, the poor relationships that sometimes you get there, working with poor customers, the rampant drug use that goes on in a lot of, especially higher level restaurants, and how much you're having to rely on drugs at that moment, or how a lot of people do. So it's not a polished topic by any means. However, the way that Anthony goes about talking about it is very much of his style and puts it in a very charming perspective. And is someone who's, obviously, I've never worked in like a fine restaurant before, but having worked in fast food places, one thing that hit me was it was incredible just at how universal some of these things are in just food service in general. So if you're interested in learning anything more about the world behind food service, and if you're interested in learning about Anthony Bourdain as a person, I would highly recommend this. I would highly recommend the audiobook because he does a fantastic job narrating it as well. And again, I'm just really glad I finally pulled the trigger on this despite my hesitations. And rest in peace, Anthony Bourdain. That's all I can really say. All right, you're next up.
Yep.
There you go.
It's over by you again. So my penultimate favorite book of the year was The Grief of Stones by Catherine Addison. This is, I just realized I have a lot of books that have like very dark worlds. Anyway, this is also the second book in a series. It's the second book in the Cemeteries of Mallow series, which is a spin-off from Catherine Addison's The Goblin Emperor. And this one follows Thara Kelleher, who is a witness for the dead. And he moves to Mallow, and it's following him as he's solving various mysteries. This book in particular, I really love the development for Kelleher and the development he gets in his relationships with other people, because Kelleher is very much a character who is alone a lot, and he carries a lot of guilt for things that have happened in his past. He's just kind of a sad character. He's gone through a lot of pretty difficult things, and he carries a lot of that with him. And a lot of this book is developing his relationships with other people and kind of getting to this point where he starts to realize that he's not alone and that there are people who are willing to help him and that care about him. And that's just like a really sweet part of this book. However, the mystery in this one was very dark. And it goes also in like several different directions. It does not go where you think it's going to when you start the book. There's kind of multiple mysteries going on that interweave in different ways and kind of overlap and diverge, and just there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of mysteries happening, but this is very much kind of a character-focused series where it's really looking at Kelleher, the way he deals with things, the way he investigates, and a lot of what's really great about him is both his compassion for people and his desire to like do the right thing, but also his unwavering loyalty to the idea of justice and of finding the truth. Because his like catchphrase is that like he will find the truth for you, but you may not like what he finds, so you have to be prepared to accept whatever he discovers. And that's very much a through current of this book. I just really like this. I like this continuation of Kelleher's story. I liked the mysteries in here, and I think what's really great about these books and about The Goblin Emperor, kind of the through line of the whole set of books, is the sense that the world that it's set in is just like very deeply fucked up. It's a very messed up world with lots of issues of like classism and racism and homophobia, and there's just like lots of problems, but it's consistently a series of books that is about people doing everything in their power to make the world a little bit better for the people around them. And I just really like that as a theme that goes on through both the Cemeteries of Mallow books and the original Goblin Emperor, but I feel like that really shows up strongly in this book in particular. And I love Thara. He is delightful.
Alright, number 2 on my list is A Song for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. Man, this in complete opposite of what we have talked about. This book's like a nice warm hug.
It really is.
The world and the world that Becky Chambers made for this is just it's like sugary candy that you eat like crack. It's fantastic. The story by itself focuses around a non-binary T-monk in this kind of alternate Earth-like world that's set in the kind of future. It's a very different place. But as far as a non-binary T-monk named Dex, who travels to different places offering tea to the people of the city that they travel to. And they kind of grow tired of doing what they do. They're looking for purpose, and so they travel out into the woods where the robots that used to inhabit the world all disappeared into the woods and had not been seen for several hundred years at this point. Well, lo and behold, but who does Dex find when they get to the woods but a lovely robot named Mosscap, who is probably my favorite character out of any book I read this year. Mosscap is an utter delight. They are a lot of fun. Mosscap's point as to why they have approached Dex is that they have been sent by a robot delegation to learn about the humans and find out what they need and see if there's anything the robots can help with. And so begins the journey of Mosscap sticking by Dex and them growing together.
Sorry, there was a random little break there. The timer for the pie went off. I had to go take it out of the oven. So
now we wait 2 hours for it to cool.
Yeah, we made pecan pie.
Alright, so I guess I'll just start back from where I was. I mean,
yeah, you can just continue. I'll just cut it right there.
Yeah, I didn't have much else to say, but I just really enjoyed Dex and Mosscap's dynamic is really, really fun. Again, Mosscap as a character is a lot of fun, and it does go into a very meaningful and emotional point that leads to the climax of the book at the very end. There is a second book which you have read. I have not yet. I do need to get to that. That probably will be one I tackle in 2023. I imagine that if it is any good as the first one, there is a high chance it will end up on my top 5 of 2023.
I think you're really going to like it, because I liked it just as much as I liked the first book.
Yeah. So Becky Chambers did a phenomenal job of the world building and making some really memorable characters, because it's a very unique book in a lot of ways. So definitely, if you're looking for something that is an easy read, that it has a fun world to it, fun characters, nothing that's too high stakes, I would highly recommend this.
Cool. I'll second that recommendation, because I also really liked it.
All right.
I have hiccups I'm trying to ward off.
Your last book?
My last book, my very last favorite book that I have to talk about this year is A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland. I love this book. This was actually, of these books, it's the only one I didn't give 5 stars. It's my 4.5 star. And the only reason this didn't get 5 stars for me is that the first chapter is a little bit shaky, but the rest of the book is phenomenal. But this is a fantasy romance. This was really the year where I started reading fantasy romance. So there were several of these that kind of cropped up to me when I was making my list. But this one I just really enjoyed because this one follows Prince Kadu of the Arast Empire, and he finds himself in a very awkward position, having gotten into a conflict with the father of his sister, the Sultan's newest child, her new baby. It's her first child, and the father of the child has gotten into this conflict with Kadu, and Kadu's gotten kind of embarrassed and has some blame on him for what's happened, and so he finds himself needing to basically prove his loyalty both to his sister and to the Empire, and so he kind of redoubles his efforts to solve this ongoing mystery that's a part of his responsibilities. He is the, I can't remember what the title is, but basically he's in charge of all the shipping operations. That's a big thing in Arast. And there was a break-in at the Shipbuilders Guild. So he's kind of redoubling his efforts to solve this mystery. And as a part of that, he ends up getting involved with, not so much the mystery, not involved with the mystery, but in his conflict with this other guy, he ends up having to work with Evamer, who is one of the guard. And Evamur is incredibly stoic and very, like, a rules follower. For him, something isn't... He doesn't follow the rules because it's the right thing to do, but because they are the rules and they should be followed. So that is a big hurdle for Keidu to get around, because Keidu is very much a person who wants to always do the right thing, regardless of whether it's, like, the rules thing to do, the thing that he, by law or whatever, should be doing. He's always focused on, like, what's going to do the most good for everybody. And he's also a character that I really love because he has chronic anxiety, and I think that that is brilliantly written in this book. The way that Keidu experiences his anxiety, the ways that he learns to kind of deal with it, and the support network that grows around him to help him cope with it, is just really, really well done. I think this is great anxiety rep, which is not normally a thing that I focus on in books, but I just think that it was so well done here that it's worth pointing out. But also, this is one where the romance is just brilliantly done. I think that the development of the relationship between the two characters is really believable, but there's also the sense that the other characters in the book, the side characters, aren't flat. Like, they're also full people. Everybody here feels like a well-rounded character, and I really appreciate that, because I think my usual problem with romance books is that there's often a character who feels like they're the central character, and then everyone else is just around to, like, further their story, and the other people don't really get any development. But this book does a really good job of both developing the central romance in a really interesting way, developing the mystery in a really interesting way, and then also allowing all of the other characters to feel like well-developed, interesting characters in their own right, which I really like. So I think this is a really impressive book. So even though I didn't give it 5 stars, it's still one of my favorites. It's one that I still talk about a lot and think about a lot, and I think it does some really interesting things as well with, like, power dynamics and questions of power, and also of, like, leadership and what makes a good leader. I think that's really interesting too. So lots of good themes, great romance, good mystery. I just really liked it, and everyone's probably sick of hearing me talk about it at this point.
Okay, so my final book I want to talk about, which I did rate these, so this is my book of the year. I'm actually kind of cheating with it because this is not just one book. It's actually 13 of them. This is a series of manga called Oyasumi Punpun, or in the English title, Goodnight Punpun. I finished this back in September. And I have not been able to get it out of my mind since. Oyasumi Punpun was a manga series that was written by Inyo Asano that was published, I believe, between 2007 and 2013. And it's got full English translations and everything. So if anything about what I'm getting ready to talk about interests you, feel free to check it out. But at the core of this, Goodnight Punpun is a coming-of-age story. But it does focus on quite a bit more. So the main character is Onodera Punpun, and it follows him through his life. And the manga can be split into 4 sections. Elementary school age, middle school age, high school age, and then his early mid-20s. And it follows Punpun as he goes through these stages of life and watches him tackle, many of the things that he has to go through, including abandonment from his father, his mother being an abusive individual, coping with learning what love is, learning what sex is, going through that. It covers a lot of the things that you can kind of associate with coming of age stories, and a lot of the things that you're going to learn as you go through them, is tackled. And another big thing of that is also religion. There is a cult storyline in this that is bizarre, to say the least. But then again, Goodnight Punpun, in a lot of ways, is extremely bizarre. This is not a super grounded manga. It focuses on very grounded topics, and it handles a lot of very realistic topics, but there's a lot of very weird shit to this, and that's the only way I can put it. But I can say with confidence that there has not been a single piece of media, not just book or manga, I am talking media in any format, that has stuck with me the way that Oyasumi Punpun has. And I mean that very genuinely. The one thing I do want to put to this is that it's very hard for me to sum up everything because it covers a lot. This is 13 volumes of manga, and we're talking about 3,000 or 4,000 pages worth of story here. So I would highly recommend, going into it. It does take a couple volumes to really get into the thick of it. And the last 2 or 3 volumes ripped my damn heart to shreds. But I do want to say that, like in the Dream House, which I talked about earlier, you have to understand what you're getting into because this does tackle some very dark stuff, of which I do want to mention right now: sexual assault, suicide, murder, abuse, cult activities. There's a terrorist attack in one of the volumes. Really do your research and see what's going to be in there. There is a lot of very dark topics tackled, and the ending of it is very depressing. It definitely messed with me for a little while, and depression is one of the very key topics of the book: depression and social isolation. So make sure that you're gonna, if you plan on tackling this, making sure that you're going to be okay with what's going to be presented, because it does get worse as it goes along. People who have not liked this has called it torture porn at the very end. And while I wouldn't agree with that, I could definitely see where they're coming from. So definitely keep that in mind. But if you're willing to tackle it, you're going to come across one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best, and also one of the most lauded manga series of its kind ever. Because this is a lot of people consider this one of the best manga ever, and I will 100% agree with that at this point in time.
Cool. We read a lot of stuff this year.
We read a lot of stuff this year, yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, I am kind of cheating because you guys are like, yeah, my book of the year is 13 of them, and it's like 4,000 pages.
Yeah.
But
it's really hard to narrow down.
Well, it's one whole story, so that's why I called it.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you read them all, like, back to back, too. Because I remember when you were reading that.
Yeah, I read all of them in a span of, like, 3 days.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. But, like, it was so hard to narrow down for this. I had some stuff I had to remove from my initial list. I think it's funny that a lot of the fantasy romance ended up in there. I think it's because it was a year that was, I think, hard for a lot of people. Like, we've all just had kind of a difficult year, and at least for me, like, the things I think stuck with me this year were things that had kind of a hopeful tone, or something that brought me some kind of joy in the midst of everything else. Like, certainly there have been good things this year, but I think that was what I was gravitating to, at least, in fiction.
And I read
You read some difficult stuff this year. I read
some very difficult stuff, but it's, but, hey, I feel like taking in stuff like that is important. If you can handle stuff like that, I think being able to read that is important, because if anything, in the Dream Houses and the Oyasumi Pum Pums, I feel like will help you appreciate things like Your Taste of Golden Iron and A Prayer for the Wild Built more. So it's but we've read a lot this year.
We have
easily the most books I've ever read in a year.
Yeah, this is, I think, the most books I've read in a year as well. Yeah. Because I think my previous record was like 68, and I'm at 73 now, so.
I only read 17 last year, so it was quite...
You were in a slump for most of last year, though, too.
It was very much a jump.
Yeah. But those were our least favorites, our honorable mentions, all of our favorites of the year. And I think that's pretty much all we have for you today. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. We really hope you've enjoyed this video. Let us know down in the comments what your favorite book of 2022 was. We would love to know, especially because we're always looking for more recommendations. I always like to see what other people are reading.
We will read anything.
We will. This is true. Whatever people say is good, we'll usually pick it up and try it.
Even if it's not good.
I've read 3 of the From Blood and Ash books after hating the first one, so
Yeah, I wouldn't do that, but that's
me.
It's her channel, so it's.
I just apparently am fine with suffering for that. But yeah, that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for watching once again, and if you like this video, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting every Tuesday and Saturday, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.
Happy New Year!